The order came down on a Tuesday morning. It always seemed to be a Tuesday, the most forgettable day of the week, when men like him chose to do something they did not want to be remembered for. He did not deliver the message himself. He gave it to someone below him who gave it to someone below that person, and by the time the words arrived at the gate, they had passed through so many mouths that they no longer carried the shape of his voice. But the meaning was still sharp. The palace gates were to remain closed, to her specifically, to this one woman. Nobody wrote it in a letter. Nobody signed anything. That was the art of it, the kind of power that erases its own fingerprints. Her name was Mariam. She was 53 years old, and she walked with the kind of slowness that has nothing to do with tiredness. It was a slowness that said she had stopped chasing things a long time ago. She had learned, after many years, that the things worth having did not run away from a woman who moved with purpose. She had come to that palace the first time 17 years ago, not as a visitor, not as a guest. She had come as someone who belonged there, brought by the man who would later decide she did not. Those first years were good, or they seemed good, the way mornings seem bright before you notice the clouds building at the edge of the sky. She had worked quietly inside those walls. She had given her knowledge, her time, her careful attention. She had sat in rooms where important decisions were made, and she had spoken only when what she had to say was worth the air it would use. People listened when she spoke. That was something she had not chased either. It had simply followed her. The man, his name does not need to be written here, and perhaps that is the most fitting thing about this entire story, had once valued her. He had admired what she could do, the way people admire a tool when it is working well. But there is a difference between being valued and being respected. She understood that difference earlier than he did, and understanding it earlier was the beginning of the trouble between them. She had given that place years. She had given it her name stitched quietly into its story. She had given it her silence when silence was the most expensive thing she owned. He was the kind of man who needed to be the most important person in every room. When she was present, that was difficult. Not because she tried to compete with him. She never tried to compete with him. It was simply that some people carry a weight in them, a natural gravity, and everyone in the room feels it without knowing why they feel it. He felt it. And over time, feeling it began to irritate him the way a small stone irritates a man inside his shoe. Harmless, but impossible to ignore. The day she decided to leave was the day he realized he had made a mistake. Not the mistake of treating her poorly. He never fully understood that mistake. The mistake he recognized was a practical one. She knew things. She had been present for decisions, documents, conversations that he now preferred to keep quiet. A woman who knew those things and was also, by then, walking away from him, that was a problem. So he did what men who build walls instead of bridges always do. He reached for the lock. On the morning she went to the palace, she woke before sunrise, not because she was nervous. She had moved past nervous the way you move past a town on a long drive. You notice it, you pass through it, and then it is behind you and smaller in the mirror with every mile. She made tea. She sat by the window and drank it while the city outside was still dark and quiet, still deciding what kind of day it wanted to be. She watched a street cleaner push his cart along the empty road below, and she thought about how every important place in the world relies on people who work before anyone is watching. She dressed without rushing. She chose a dark blue dress, the color of deep water, of things that do not move even when the surface does. She put on small gold earrings, the ones her mother had given her, the ones she wore only when she needed to remember where she came from. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment, not the way a woman looks when she is unsure of herself, but the way a person looks when they are making certain they have everything they need before a long journey. She ate breakfast, toast, and an egg. She did not call anyone. There was no one who needed to know what she was doing. What she was doing had been decided already, in the quiet of many long nights, and decisions that took that long to make do not need an audience when they are finally carried out. She took a taxi. She watched the streets pass. She arrived. The palace sat behind its gates the way old power always sits, certain of itself in a way that does not need to be announced. The iron was dark and thick. The hinges were the size of a man's fist. The walls on either side were pale stone, and the guards who stood at their posts wore uniforms the color of the sky in the hour before rain. There were 4 of them that morning, 2 at the gate itself and 2 more a little further back, stationed at the edge of the entrance road. The ones at the gate were young, 25, perhaps 26. They had the look of men who had been trained well, and had not yet had enough time to become careless. She stepped out of the taxi. She paid the driver. She stood still for a moment, just looking at the gate the way a person looks at a mountain before they begin to walk toward it, not afraid, not in a hurry, simply present. Then she walked toward it. She did not walk to the palace gates, she arrived at them. The distinction lived in her shoulders. The first guard, the one on the left, the one who was perhaps a year or two younger than the other, saw her coming from a distance. Later, he would not be able to explain exactly what he noticed first. It was not her age or her dress or her earrings or the way the early light caught her as she walked. It was something that arrived before all of those things. Something in the way the space around her seemed to settle when she moved through it, like water that has been disturbed by a stone and then smooths itself back into calm. He straightened his posture without deciding to. His colleague noticed him straighten and did the same without knowing why. She stopped in front of the gate. She looked at both of them, one and then the other, and she said, quietly and without any performance in her voice, "I need to enter." 3 words, not a demand, not a plea. A statement offered with the same calm certainty with which a river states its intention to reach the sea. The guards knew about the order, of course they knew. It had come through the right channels. It had arrived with the correct authority behind it. They were not disobeying it because they had forgotten it. They were disobeying it because of what was standing in front of them. There is something that happens in a person, in the part of a person that exists before their training and their habits and their obedience, when they are faced with a specific kind of human dignity. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not make speeches. It simply stands there in a dark blue dress and small gold earrings, and it is so clearly, so undeniably real that the paper of an order, any order, suddenly feels very thin in comparison. The younger guard turned to look at the gate, then he looked at her. Then he made a decision that was not a decision. The way breathing is not a decision. It was simply the only thing that made sense to do. He reached for the gate. The mechanism was heavy. It had been built to resist. The hinges groaned with the effort of moving something that had been locked and still with the intention of staying that way. But they moved. Slowly and then with more ease as the other guard added his hands to the work, they moved. The gate opened. She did not step forward immediately. She let the gate open all the way. She let the morning air pass through the space it had made. And then, when it was fully open and there was nothing between her and the palace road, the younger guard did something that surprised even himself. He stood at attention, shoulders back. Eyes straight, the practiced, formal, deliberate gesture that soldiers give to people who have earned it. He saluted her. His colleague, without a word exchanged between them, did the same. Not the office, not the title, her. 2 young men in the pale gray light of an early morning, standing at attention in front of a woman who had been told, by someone with more authority than either of them would ever hold, that she was not welcome here. She looked at them, something passed through her face, not the soft collapse of a woman who is moved to crying, but something harder and quieter than that. The look of someone who has spent years carrying the knowledge that they were right about something, and has finally, in a moment they did not plan for, received the only kind of confirmation that matters. Not from a court, not from a document, from 2 strangers who had nothing to gain and chose, anyway, to tell the truth about what they saw. She gave a small nod, just one, the kind of nod that says, "I see you, thank you, I will not forget this." Then she walked through. She did not look back. She did not look triumphant in the way people imagine triumph, looking, raised chin, wide eyes, the drama of a moment savored. She simply walked, at the same pace she had been walking since she stepped out of the taxi, toward the building ahead. She looked like a woman going where she had always been going. What happened inside the palace that morning is a story for another time. What she said, who she met, what was handed over and what was taken back, those details belong to a different telling. This story ends at the gate, or rather it ends just after it. When she had walked far enough down the road that she was no longer easily visible, the 2 guards returned to their posts. One of them pulled the gate closed again. The iron swung back, the latch caught, the lock engaged. It looked exactly as it had looked before she arrived, the same dark iron, the same pale stone on either side, the same weight, the same silence, the same certainty of something old and heavy and made to last. But something was different. The younger guard stood at his post and did not speak. He was thinking about the order he had disobeyed. He was thinking about the woman who had walked through the gate as though the gate had always been meant to open for her. He was thinking about what it means to be given a rule, and what it means to understand, in the body, before the mind has time to argue that following that particular rule would have been a kind of harm he was not willing to be responsible for. He did not feel afraid of what might come next. He felt the opposite of afraid, though he did not yet have the right word for it. He would find the word later. He would carry it for the rest of his life. The man who gave the order never spoke publicly about what happened that morning. He learned about it. You cannot lock a gate and then have it opened and not eventually learn that it was opened, and he said nothing. What he felt in the private space behind his silence is unknown. Men who build their sense of safety on locked doors do not often share what they feel when those doors are opened by the very people they trusted to keep them closed. Perhaps he was angry. Perhaps he was something more uncomfortable than anger, the feeling that arrives when you discover that the thing you were trying to bury had too much weight to stay underground. Perhaps he simply sat in a room somewhere and understood, for the first time, the difference between authority and respect. That authority can lock a gate. That authority can issue an order, pass it down through the correct channels, have it arrive with all the right weight behind it. But respect, the real kind, the kind that two young guards in pale gray uniforms offered to a woman in a dark blue dress on an ordinary Tuesday morning, that cannot be commanded. It cannot be locked away. It cannot be kept on the other side of any gate, no matter how heavy the iron, no matter how deliberate the instruction to keep it shut. Respect follows people who have earned it, and it follows them through gates that were never meant to open. He had built his whole position on the belief that power was the gate, and the gate was power. He had miscounted something. Maryam did not return to the palace after that morning. She did not need to. She had gone there for one specific purpose, and the purpose had been served. She went home on the same Tuesday, ate dinner, called her sister, and went to sleep at a reasonable hour. She did not tell her sister about the gate or the guards or the salute. That was not the part of the day she wanted to carry into the night. What she carried instead was something smaller and more personal, the memory of the younger guard's face, just before his hand moved toward the gate. The moment of choice that had happened there so quickly that most people would have missed it. The way a man can decide in less than a second what kind of person he wants to be. She thought about that for a long time afterward. Not about herself, or about the man who had given the order, or about what the morning had meant in the larger picture of her life. She thought about that young guard, about the small and enormous bravery of choosing correctly when no one important is watching, about the fact that the right thing, done quietly and without applause in the pale light of an early morning in front of iron gates that were not supposed to move, that thing lands. It matters. It stays. She had spent 17 years learning that power leaves marks on everything it touches. She had spent those years learning that some marks fade and others do not, that some things survive the weight of power pressing down on them and come out the other side still whole, still upright, still walking at the same unhurried pace. She had learned it in many ways and in many rooms. But she had never learned it as cleanly, or as simply, or as permanently as she learned it that Tuesday morning, when a gate that had been locked to keep her out swung open instead, and two young men stood at attention in the gray light and told her, without a single word, everything she had always known about herself. The gate closed behind her. It looked the same as before. It was not.